Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Stephanie Gregson, Chief Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction. On behalf of Superintendent Tony Thurman, I would like to welcome you to this webinar. The California Department of Education is working diligently to provide timely information to school districts, teachers, and families as we continue the school year through distance learning. We know our teachers, parents, and administrators are all working extremely hard. We are in this together, and we are learning together. Many teachers and students have already begun instruction and learning through this model, while others are still in planning and early implementation phases, while also connecting with students and families. Distance learning is new for some teachers, but we also have many teachers who have been engaging in various aspects of distance learning. We are learning from each other as we continue to understand where support is needed and what questions need to be asked. We are working thoughtfully and quickly in ensuring our guidance and webinars address these questions and areas of support. Today's webinar, hosted by Shanine Coates, the Director of Curriculum Frameworks and Instructional Resources Division, will help listeners to learn about the resources for English learners that are available right now, and to hear from two school districts, Glendale Unified and Atomus Unified, who have moved to a complete distance learning model. Their methods and their successes and challenges may help to inform districts still in those planning and early implementation phases. Again, I want to thank you for tuning in today, and I would also like to remind you to visit the CDE's COVID-19 website for continued guidance and updates. As I said before, we're all in this together, and we appreciate you. With that, I will turn it over to Shanine.
Thank you, Dr. Gregson. The transition to distance learning is a journey that we are embarking on together. We know that our schools and our districts are working and doing the work that they need to meet students where they are in continuing their learning. We understand that is the focus on Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a foundation that will get us through this transition and to high quality learning. In order to do that, we must understand the needs and be seekers of equity. This is true whether we are in a physical classroom or participating in remote, virtual, or distance learning. But this has been amplified during this particular time. Our goal with these webinars is to provide support and guidance as we walk through this journey together and provide an opportunity for all of us to hear from districts who are transitioning to distance learning. So today, we will hear first from the Director of the English Learner Support Division, Dr. Veronica Aguilar, and she will discuss the different English learner supports and strategies that are still very much applicable in a distance learning model. Following Veronica, we will hear from two school districts that have transitioned to district learning. Dr. Stepan Mekatarian, Coordinator of Assessment and Accountability in the Glendale Unified School District, will present on that district's work in district-level planning, communication with teachers and communities, and distribution of devices for students who need them, including Glendale's successes and how they have addressed some of the challenges that arise in making this transition so quickly. When Dr. Mekatarian is finished, we will hear from Angela Herrera, Chief Academic Officer, and Carol Swanson, Associate Superintendent in the Natomas Unified School District, as they discuss their own challenges and successes, including how they are meeting the needs of all students, including supports for English learner students in a distance learning environment. During the entire webinar, please enter any questions you have in the Q&A window. We will not have time to respond immediately to your questions. However, we are using them to inform future FAQs on the COVID-19 website. We will now turn it over to Dr. Aguilar.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be representing the English Learner Support Division and provide you with the opportunity to learn some of the great work, the two districts that we're highlighting today. And I want to begin by reminding everyone that we have 1.2 million English learners in the state of California. which is 1/4 of our population, and we must ensure that equity continues to be provided to them. Next slide, please. So during the school closures, English learners must continue to receive designated and integrated English language development as part of the educational curriculum. Local education agencies have the flexibility to determine how services will be provided to English learners. The local education agencies can determine where, when, and what the students receive in order to continue to make progress towards English language proficiency and meet grade level academic achievement. We know this is unprecedented times, and so that flexibility needs to be there, but we must still remain true to the efforts of providing designated and integrated English language development. Although there are no minimum requirement for minutes of English language development, it is a required course of study. Many times we receive questions about the minimum requirement of English language development. There has not been any minimum requirements in state or federal law. The only subject that has minimum requirement is physical education. And so English language development must occur as part of the regular curriculum. Next slide. So how do we go about doing this? I think let's remember that every district currently has materials that are adopted at the local level. And those materials have workbooks that could be sent home with students. And we are asking local education agencies to determine which of those curriculum has digital integrated materials with English language development components that could be used in distance learning, keeping in mind that publishers and vendors may be able to provide full access to components that support distance learning as if they have them available. But since this is a local decision state, each district has adopted different curriculum. And so we encourage you to please reach out to the publishers that you have adopted to seek having full access to the free materials. Next slide, please. We can ensure equity of access for English learners by providing designated time for designated English language development within distance learning scheduled for the English learner students. It is important to build scaffolds also to continue provided integrated English language development within the core subjects. And knowing that 1/4 of our population are English learners, this is a heavy lift for all our teachers. But I know we all became teachers because we wanted to serve all students and provide equitable services to all students. So it will take a little bit of more of a heavy lift to design those lessons to be scaffolded, but it can be done. And we're highlighting 2 districts that can be used as resources as well. Also consider the fact that some English learners may not have access to the online learning. And we need to consider a hybrid model where we can offer virtual learning as well as assignment packets. We also need to consider the fact that there are remote areas in the state of California that even if we have a Chromebook and a hotspot, they could still not have access. Therefore, we should look at other resources such as TV, local TV stations that can use some of the resources that I will be presenting to then be streamed live for the students that may not have access to a Chromebook. Next slide. So equity of access for multilingual students includes providing the type of programs that your district currently provides. We know across the state there are bilingual programs, dual language programs, language acquisition programs, And those can continue to be offered through distance learning. I know Glendale, who will be presenting next, has multilingual programs in place, dual language programs in place. And so we need to work together to disseminate the best practices as some districts are leading this work. Distance learning provides the opportunity to deepen and capitalize on students' use of their home language. We know research shows how much the brain grows when more than one language is learned. And since students are at home with their parents, growing that home language is an asset at this time. Therefore, we must provide all EL students and families with resources for literacy in their home languages. And I want to highlight some of those resources, as well as design culturally responsive lessons. Next slide. I mentioned the use of television stations. I wanted to highlight this resource from PBS, Public Broadcast Station, that actually offers in English and Spanish resources by grade level that can be broadcasted through a live local TV station. Or if students have the hotspots in the Chromebooks, then they can do distance learning through this medium. Next slide. About 2 weeks ago, the California Department of Education, Dr. Gregson and Janine Coates offer a distance learning webinar. And many things were highlighted. Last week, special education was highlighted. Today, we want to highlight that document again, but we want to highlight the pieces that are within that document that address English learners and provide you with resources that you can use to provide access and equity for all students, but in particular English learners. Also students with disabilities. As we know, there are a number of students that are both dually identify as English learners and students with disabilities, as well as serving, as I mentioned, the students that are in bilingual classrooms, dual language classrooms. So in our COVID page, you will find this resource, and we want to make sure that we keep on referencing you to it because we are updating it on a weekly basis as new resources come in, and this is your one-stop shop to be able to have those resources. Next slide. Appendix 1 has the English language development learning games and activities, as well as the multilingual resources. Note also that there's publishers, free publisher materials that are available as part of this distance learning document. Next slide. So when you click on the appendix, you'll see this English language development resources, a list of them, and many more. I wanted to highlight a few here so that I could entice you to go there and be able to click on those links so that you can have resources for listening, speaking, reading, and writing, which are the 4 domains that we need to make sure that English learners are still receiving those resources. Next slide. We have another section of the document that highlights multilingual learning resources. And as you can see from this slide, we have several resources in Spanish. The majority of our 1.2 million English learners, or about 80% of them, speak Spanish. So we see that there's a lot more resources in that area, but we're boosting up this area with other languages. Chinese books are available, or Chinese Boost is one of the resources linked here, as well as we'll be updating it as we receive more resources that we can provide to be of service to all our communities that speak multiple languages. Next slide. So as I mentioned, please keep this website in mind and keep on checking every Friday as there will be updates. Next slide. I wanted to mention we have an English Learner Updated newsletter that's provided to our Bilingual Coordinators Network. If you would like to subscribe to receiving that directly, please click on the link as well, and we'll be able to send it to you directly. And this is in particular to English learners. Next slide. We have a distance learning parent newsletter that you will also be receiving on a weekly basis, and it's written in a format that can be used with parents. Next slide. And I wanted to mention also the grading and graduation. I know there's a lot of information going out right now, but this is important to keep in mind that guidance was provided and it applies to English learners, particularly the second bullet. The local education agencies should weigh their policies with the lens of equity and with the primary goal of first doing no harm to students. Please note that everything that we provide from the department applies to English learners. And so if there's additional information that we haven't provided, I'm always available to receive those questions and then respond to them. Next slide. I wanted to mention the State Seal of Biliteracy. We're continuing to offer those State Seal of Biliteracy. There's guidance that is being developed and will be posted on the CDE Seal of Biliteracy webpage as soon as it is available. And this will address the COVID-19 closures and how to continue to provide State Seal of Biliteracy recognition. Next slide, please. I wanted to end by highlighting Kern County Office of Education that developed a series of webinars that uses the English language arts standards in tandem with the English language development content standards. As you know, for English learners, we need to address both standards as we provide distance learning. I want to encourage you to reach out to Kern County. Katie Gregory made her email available to you if you're designing lessons. She wanted to be able to provide the 9-week lessons that they have built. And as Dr. Gregson mentioned, together we can achieve so much more by building more and more resources that we can all share. Next slide, please. And in multiple languages on behalf of the students of California that speak multiple languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aguila. Thank you for walking us through those important supports and resources that are available. We will now turn to Dr. Mekatarian of Glendale Unified. Dr. Mekatarian, can you share your screen with us now?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the CDE for this opportunity to share Glendale's experiences with the transition to remote learning. It has truly been a collaborative effort with every department coming together to contribute to this effort. I'm reminded that I am fortunate to work on a dedicated team that puts student well-being and learning first. So during this brief presentation, we're going to do an overview of our rollout plan, specifically how we distributed our hardware, how we trained parents, teachers, students, and school leaders on how to prepare for this transition. We'll talk about some considerations and challenges we face and how we overcame them, and some recommendations for your transition as well. So first we'll start with the hardware distribution. As soon as we realized that we need to transition to remote learning, we noticed that there were thousands of students who did not have access to hardware or computing devices at home. And so we needed to get information on who needed those supports right away. And it was not going to happen in a very quick turnaround. And so what we did was we developed a survey and sent out that survey over to our families so that they can go ahead and identify what devices they would need in order to be able to access learning at home. We could not wait to get all of the responses in time because we have 26,000 students. So as soon as we got to about 9,000, 10,000 responses within the first couple of days, we used that to develop an extrapolation model that would help us identify and predict on a district-wide level who would need those devices. We also made a plan to determine how long it would take for each of those devices to be given out. And we used that to create a 16 model to give out our devices over the course of 4 days. We used social distancing guidelines in the process to make sure that everyone was safe. And in 4 days' time, we had given out over 7,500 devices. Hotspots are still on their way, but the majority of our students who needed a device at that time were able to receive them. We've developed a kiosk system in our district office since then. So for anyone who, for whatever reason, was not able to get their device during those first 4 days, is able to stop by now and go ahead and pick up that device. So now that students have access to hardware, we're able to talk about the type of training that both students would need at home, and also for our teachers and principals as well, so they can implement remote learning as well. So as we begin to discuss how we roll out this training for teachers and principals, what was most important for us is to have one starting point for all of our stakeholders. There's a lot of information. I'm sure each of you have been getting hundreds of emails on resources. And while it is very powerful to have access to so many different tools, it can be a little intimidating, and it's difficult to decipher and to sift through all those materials to determine what resources make the most sense for your school, for your population, and which ones you need to prioritize. But by having one starting point for your stakeholders, everyone starts at the same place, and that information is then disseminated with context. So for principals, they start off on that main page and move on to the principal guide. For teachers, they start on that main page and move on to the teacher section, and same thing with parents, guardians, and students. So that one-stop shop sort of allows us to disseminate information with context, allowing us to have screencasts where they make sense, access to different resources we've provided, and of course, the training. So for our training model, we created webinars, a series of webinars that occurred every single day, twice a day on different topics, and we recorded all the webinars to make sure that anyone can have access to them. We prioritized the resources and the topics that were most critical, that we figured most teachers would take advantage of, and use that as a place to house all the resources. So now at this point, if any teacher wants, let's say, additional training on a particular tool or program, they know exactly where to go. They start from that starting point and they go straight to training, and they get access to that information. We also included a specific section specifically for teaching and learning, and in there we included lesson plan templates for students both with and without technology. So while we have given out computing devices to all of our students, there are still some students who don't have access to Wi-Fi, which we are working on, and we want to make sure that in the meantime, students are still accessing learning even if they don't have a computing device, and that means lesson plans that include instructions both with and without hardware access. The resources we organized on similarly with elementary and secondary breakouts. Within those, we also broke it down by grade level and by subject, so that as a teacher in a particular area, it would be easy for me to go in and identify quickly the resources that would be most beneficial for me. Finally, we added screencasts throughout our plan to provide specific instructions on setting security settings for, let's say, teleconferencing, how to log into specific apps. A lot of the questions that we get that require just technical explanations, screencasts help us quite a bit. We keep them very short, usually within just a minute or two, and they're hyperlinked directly into the materials that we have developed. So when we make a reference to, let's say, for example, how to set up Zoom, there'll be a screencast there that a teacher or principal can click on for easy access on how to set up the correct settings without having to reach out to our departments for that type of support, bringing up our hotlines for other types of questions. For parents and guardians, first we sent out an expectations message, which was translated. This set the framework for identifying, what type of assignments they can expect around where they can get information, where they can get additional support, And we put a lot of information on our website, which you see there, usd.net/remote learning. This website is constantly updated with information on online instruction, access to meals, technology support. And because we were getting a lot of questions specifically on tech support and on support for students with learning disabilities, we created a special hotline for both areas that parents can call and get direct help. We know that with remote learning, communication is critical, and I think that can alleviate a lot of frustration with this transition, especially one that happens so rapidly. And these hotlines have been very, very helpful in making sure that we have access, that stakeholders have access to the information they need so that they can continue learning. We also fast-tracked our translation services for all communication. So there are many languages spoken throughout Glendale Unified, and we make sure that everything we send out to parents and guardians are translated. And we also offer supports for translation during video conferencing. So we have live teleconferencing support as well in other languages. These steps have really helped in alleviating a lot of the concern that families had with this transition. And for many, they were not ready for this just because it happened so quickly. And these steps have really helped sort of lessen that initial anxiety. Some considerations to think about as you develop your remote learning plan. Think about differentiated instruction and support and effective questioning, what these will look like in the online space. These are good conversations to have with your teaching and learning department to determine what type of professional development teachers will need in order to be able to continue with high quality instruction. Also think about actionable feedback. A lot of times feedback is focused around grading or state assessments, and both of those are very limited right now, which means this is a good opportunity to talk about what other type of feedback we can provide students to help expand their learning. Try to keep as many of your programs district-wide in place as possible so that learning continues uninterrupted. As Veronica mentioned, we have a very robust dual immersion program, and we have continued with that dual immersion program even in the remote learning space. And so it's a time to sort of think about innovative approaches to continue your instructional programs. And with so many resources out there, there's got to be a way for those programs to continue as well. Finally, some recommendations. First, start with prioritizing student safety and privacy, both technical system safeguards that are district-wide and also guidelines for using those resources to make sure that students are safe is the most critical step. Emphasize the importance of digital citizenship. Very often, digital citizenship is only discussed after an incident occurs. I encourage you to really prioritize digital citizenship before anything happens so that we can train our stakeholders on what that looks like and create a safe online learning space. Organize directions and content with hyperlinked directions so that people have access at their fingertips. Again, with a one-pager, I think that would really help. That's broken down by teacher, principal, and parent, guardian, and student. Include screencasts for directions and include them not as a giant list, but in context with the topic that's being shared. Develop systems to build school leader capacity with remote learning. Think about things like checklists where where school leaders can identify hardware use, access to online sites, a way for teachers to indicate which programs they've been trained for, who has followed up with their digital citizenship trainings as well. And finally, think about what type of data points can be collected to measure effectiveness in this space. Again, we have very few assessments, and grading is also not being prioritized during this time. So it's an opportunity to think about other ways to collect data to gauge effectiveness. Looking at student work, this is a great opportunity to start looking at student work, looking at login records for different programs that are being used. If you're using Chromebooks, you can see how many students are logging on and the amount of time they're spending on them as another metric that you can use to collect some data. And think about where all this will go in the fall. Hopefully, if we'll return then to see how this information and these skills that folks have developed can help with the transition to more instructional technology in the physical classroom space once schools reopen. Here's my contact information if you have questions on anything presented, or if you'd like to see any of the documents I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mkhitaryan. It is encouraging to hear about the work that Glendale is doing to support the entire district community. Another district that is working hard to support their community is Natomas Unified School District. With us are Angela Herrera and Carol Swanson. We will now turn it over to them.
Thank you. We're really thankful for the opportunity to be able to present with you today and share some of the things that we are learning as we engage in this distance learning work. And obviously, as we share today, this is work that we are, this is the point in time that we are at, and we understand that there is more to be learned, and we appreciate the partnership that we've had with other districts and learning from our partners in this work. For some reason, there we go. For some reason, I apologize, my screen is not sharing. All right. So we wanted to just share some information about our district in general. Natomas Unified is located in Sacramento. We're about 5 minutes north of the state capitol building. We have about 16,000 students, and here's some significant groups that we are really trying to focus on providing support as we focus on equity. We have about 44 different languages represented, with 12% of our students being English learners. And we have about 14% of our student population identified as having special needs. And then we have some homeless and foster youth that we are also focusing on trying to support during this unprecedented time. Some of the key factors that we've focused on as we plan for distance learning, you can see here, these were just things that kind of built into the context of how we decided on our approach with distance learning. Communication has been key in our community, and recognizing where the needs exist with our families. And again, that equity on, that's a major commitment for us. We wanted to focus on utilizing existing resources so that the major effort that we were putting into implementing distance learning was on practicing with what we have rather than trying to train on new resources. We'll talk a little bit about how we have done some orientations and training and piloting, and then just recognizing that we need to be flexible in our approach as we move forward. This is something that obviously day to day is changing, and we also want to learn for the future as we explore more opportunities for virtual learning in Natomas Unified, because that definitely has not been our norm, but it is a direction that we would like to pursue for certain student groups. We just wanted to share, for context, the timeline that for our rollout of distance learning. Right now, we are in a pilot phase, which I'll talk a little bit about. And really, in the first couple of weeks, we focused on working with our labor partners to come up with this timeline and understand what work needed to be done before we rolled out a formal distance learning plan with students. So April 20th is kind of that official date that we begin distance learning with all of our students and staff. One of the things that we kind of looked at as we were determining how much time to spend with piloting was obviously making sure that we get the appropriate resources to families. But also, when we know that we're not going to be doing our spring state testing and then the end of year activities and trips, we believe that students will be engaged in instruction for roughly the equivalent number of days as they would have been otherwise. So just communication with our community, we wanted to try to create a rhythm of communication, being routine, definitely working with our labor partners, which I'll touch on just a little bit. Knowing that we needed to be timely as things are changing consistently, we felt like timeliness with communication showed that we were aware, we were working to address the situations in front of us, and then also being forthright and transparent with our community about our gaps and bumps in the road that maybe we were addressing, not trying to say that we had it all figured out right up front, not making promises that we couldn't keep, and also sharing resources and supports to families as we were able to get them, and then also giving that central place for families and staff members to be able to connect as questions came up has been really effective for us. So mentioning our work with our labor partners, very appreciative for both our classified and certificated labor partners. Both parties worked with us diligently right after we had to close schools. And we just brought those big picture interests to the table, knowing that we would not be able to solve every single problem, even the ones that obviously we had no idea that we would need to address at a later date. So we understood that there would be those challenges that existed, but we focused on big picture planning and then making note of things that may need to be revisited. And one of those things for us was supporting students with IEPs, which we'll touch a little bit on today. And then obviously continuing to have those timely and frequent communications and check-ins with our labor leaders. It's been really great to have a consistent pattern of communication to make sure that we're addressing staff needs as they arise. We just wanted to share this page. Obviously, many districts use social media very consistently, but we wanted to share a link to some of the headlines and how we communicated as we were rolling out our planning for distance learning, and then give the link to constituent and customer service. This is a department that we use, and we've used it for several years, and it's a place that families and staff know that they can reach out to that will help connect them to the resources that they may need during this time.
So within special education, to reinforce the need for communication, first thing we did was develop a plan and to set goals for our department. And then once we had those in place, we created a website, which we launched fairly quickly. And this website is both in English and in Spanish, and it includes all of the enrichment resources, the web-based curriculum that we already have in our district. It includes resources for enrichment resources for students with moderate to severe disabilities, as well as our students that are fully included in general education classrooms. Each teacher in our department has a link in this website, and parents can make direct contact with their teacher by going to their link. And then it also provides an avenue for teachers to push out information. So it's basically a one-stop shop for special ed. And then we also recently launched a psychological services website, which really dives into the mental health needs and the social emotional needs of our community. So once we had our website and we had developed our goals, we created a work plan. So basically we backward mapped, because the amount of detail here is tremendous, and we didn't want to lose sight of any of that. And we created also a communication plan. This is on a daily basis going back to March 16th. And the purpose of the plan is to keep everybody focused, because the message has got to be consistent and everybody has to be hearing it the same way. So we created this plan, and we have probably, as an administrative team, held over 200 Zoom meetings, which we've recorded with a variety of groups as needed. So we have been diving into understanding the needs of our community, and some of the things that we have focused on are the basic human needs, food and shelter. We are looking at, with equity as a major commitment for our district, we have a strong focus on English learners, students with special education, social, emotional, and mental health supports, technology, our preschool program, and then we have this group of students that we've called the Unforgotten. And these are the students, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in another slide, but these are the students that we have made a considerable effort to reach. So as we're looking at our community needs, we created a distance learning website. So when you go to our district website, and this is actually a live link here, but when you go to our district website, you'll see that all of the departments have contributed to this, and it is a resource for our families, and it includes everything that we could possibly think of that would address our unique needs. So social emotional support referral, resources for parents to help their children at home with the isolation, and even to help themselves. There's food and shelter community resources in there as well. We have 6,500 students in our district. About 61% of our kids are considered at risk. So we have connections on our website for Joey's Food Locker, which is our community food locker that's actually, when we're not on lockdown, run by our adult special education students, but right now it's not. But we are still open, and we have served over 1,000 families food for a week for a family of 4. Our mobile meal service has, since April 3rd, has served up to April 3rd, has served 49,000 meals. So we're really incredibly focused on our community needs, from basic human needs all the way to things such as mental health. Technology was a large issue for us. So when we're talking about equity, we need to make sure, and we want to do a distance learning platform, we need to make sure that all of the students come to the table with the same resources. So much like Glendale, we launched a survey to find out who needed technology. And we have 77% response rate to this survey. And it wasn't that simple because some parents didn't respond, but the effort that we made, our principals and our teachers, to reach out to our families helped tremendously. So in the end, we distributed nearly 6,000 laptop or Chromebooks and 210 hotspots to our students. So everybody is on an even playing field as we launch into distance learning. So with students with IEPs, we had to establish a goal. We needed to know what our goal was. So we established right up front that we were going to do amendments for all of our students, and that our students would be receiving individualized, as much as we can, individualized distance learning, teletherapy, support from their resource teachers and the classified staff. So we clearly communicated our plan right up front. And then we began building teams and scaffolding supports, because this is definitely a situation where not all of our adults are coming to the table with the same ability to use technology and understanding of distance learning. So we really had to scaffold how we supported our teachers and our parents so that we could launch a special education distance learning platform. And one of the things we learned early on is that we have to give permissions. We have to allow ourselves not to be perfect, that we can do the best we can, and that's what we can do. And when we need to adjust, we adjust. But everything is simply a day at a time for us. And the hold harmless was really important. We really stress homeschool collaboration, especially for our students with moderate to severe disabilities. And then the last thing regarding our needs is we know everybody is afraid of this regression piece and what's this going to mean for special education. So we're already students. So we're already tackling that conversation and looking at how we can address the needs of our students that lose ground, so that we're not waiting for the failure to happen. We're saying, hey, we know we need to be prepared, and we will be prepared. And parents, we have not forgotten your child in this process. So the unforgotten students are those students that we did not make contact with. They didn't respond to our surveys. Or for some reason or another, we were not able to reach them. And it was very, initially after all of our surveys and our outreach, we had a couple thousand kids that we had not reached. But it was important for us to reach them. So we involved many media or social media sources, communications. Our teachers got involved, our principals got involved. And as of today, we're down to 37 students that we have not made contact with, and made sure that they're ready to go.
So one of the things that I mentioned earlier is we want to utilize the existing resources so that we can move forward in the best way possible. And obviously we have our context. So for us, we were fortunate that all of our teachers already had MacBooks and iPads if they want. They've had those for the last 6 or 7 years. And we are at a place right now where we're at a 2-to-1 ratio of teachers to Chromebook carts. So essentially 1 Chromebook cart for every 2 teachers. We also have been using the Google Suite for the last 5 or so years. And then, as was mentioned a little bit earlier in the presentation for English learners, online curriculum for our core textbooks is something that we have in most areas, and then some online alternative curriculum for our moderate to severe students. And then obviously each of the sites has some site-specific online curricular resources that they've already been using. So one of the things that we wanted to do as we were at very beginning stages of prepping for distance learning lessons, we wanted to provide some resources for families to begin using if they desired. And we really try to focus on utilizing resources that required minimal, login, sharing of information, that were easy to access for families. And major thanks as we shared and borrowed and collaborated with our regional district partners. The other thing that we did was we created a student Chromebook homepage. And you can see an image in the bottom corner that just shows those are links to all of the online curricular platforms that we currently use. And this is something that each of the students will be able to access as they are trying to engage in distance learning. And then we also created a QR code and a link for the students for each school, which is tied to a splash page that has specific curriculum for their site. Now, talking about the orientation, training, and piloting, so I'm just going to warn you all, there's quite a few slides here. It really is just sample content to show our thinking and how we addressed providing support and training and resources to families and teachers. This is something that we're more than willing to talk about and share resources after the webinar has been posted and if you have questions. So we'll go through these pretty quickly, but just wanted to give you a sense of where we're at. So first we'll talk about, obviously we had to disperse teams to start working virtually. We developed a teacher orientation. We developed a student and family orientation that was in English and Spanish, our 2 highest spoken languages in the district. And then we also did some very specific special education orientations, not just for teachers and families, but for our classified staff that will be supporting in that area. And then making sure, as Carol mentioned, getting devices to families before we officially begin with distance learning. And then creating things called virtual offices to support families and staff. So in our MOU with our teachers, as a part of our timeline, we agreed, we need to pilot this plan. We need to make sure that as we're spending the time cleaning every single Chromebook that we distribute, preparing it to be delivered to students, and making sure that staff are comfortable with the platforms that exist for us, that we know that teachers are going to already start engaging. It's pretty incredible what our teachers are doing, and I see it everywhere, that the efforts that they're going to reach students already. And so while we haven't officially begun distance learning, which starts on April 20th, the last 3 weeks, teachers are connecting with their students using the platforms that exist. And it's been really helpful for us because there's some bumps and glitches and things that we're able to handle now before we get to day 1. So we created virtual offices. Essentially, each of our sites has a virtual office, a phone number and email that families can connect for different resources, and those are routed appropriately there. We have virtual departments for the district office, and then we communicated all of this out on a variety of social media platforms through district, email, and just wanted to make sure it was clear to our families and staff how they could get the support that they needed as they engage in distance learning. So these are the slides where you're going to see a lot of information that you can refer back to after the webinar. But basically, we developed a distance learning teacher orientation. And as we were putting the slides together, we recognized this is not perfect, and this is kind of our initial thinking. And as we were watching teachers engage in distance learning with their students already, we really felt like we needed to hear from them, and they could start to build on what we had put into this orientation. What was really cool was to watch, it was like an open source to watch within half an hour of it being sent out with a message from the superintendent, that there was almost 100 staff members in there looking at the content, starting to add some resources and share information. And so you can see there's the strike through version 1.0. Within a week, we had put out a second version. We didn't remove any of the content that had been added or shared by our staff members. We just built upon it. So yeah, we talk about, there's some topics covered, and this idea of equity and access being a major commitment. And then some, very basic things. These are the learning tools that we have, and creating links for how to use those tools. And then down to some logistical things, talking about student privacy, making sure that that staff, as they engage in distance learning, are using platforms that are already approved, and talking about things like making sure that families know when they are available, when teachers are available to them. And then talking about Zoom, that was mentioned earlier, how to use that. We talked about things like internet safety for teachers to consider, considerations for lesson planning, lesson chunking. And, thanks to CDE, they put out some resources early on that we were able to use as we did our orientations. And then just talking about how to engage differently with students through distance learning. And then, as I shared, after about a week, we were getting questions and thoughts and ideas from our staff and families. And so we kind of added to that presentation and kind of did a version 2.0 and highlighted some new things that were being addressed. One of the things that was really important for us, students asking for info on how to access their account from home. That can be a sticky thing that people are trying to help with. So we wanted to be really clear on how teachers could directly support students with making sure they had access. And then the other thing is, we know that teachers are on the front line. They're the ones that are talking the most with families. So we wanted to give them resources to help them help families. So they felt comfortable being able to share links to videos and screencasts for how families could access the content as well. And then the other thing, kind of not so much about the curriculum, but just keeping in mind how to maintain relationships with your students through distance learning. It definitely is different not having that in-person, face-to-face interaction every day. So we shared some information on that. And then the idea of maybe surveying to see how things are going for students and families. And so giving a sample Google form that could be used by staff. And I will say that some of our schools have already done surveys by grade level to engage with families to see how distance learning as we pilot is going so far, so that we can work out those kinks as we approach April 20th. And then we wanted to make sure that our teachers had specific hotlines for support based on their needs. And so we included those as well. Then moving to the student and family orientation, these are all available publicly. They're posted on YouTube. So I provided that link. We did them, like I said, in English and Spanish. And again, it was from things like just thinking about routines and patterns for students at home. Again, CDE was very helpful with providing some things for us to consider. Tips for setting up schedules, tips for setting up actual physical space for students. So we wanted to make sure families had this information. And then again, we use Google Suite. And so making sure that they understood how to access those different platforms with some instructions. And then also as well using Zoom meetings. And then the online curriculum, again, providing links to each of the student schools so that they felt as comfortable as possible accessing the curriculum that they needed. And again, what was mentioned before, this idea of digital citizenship and how to operate within a very digital world. We wanted to make sure that we were trying to address some of those concerns that families might have proactively, as well as making sure they understand that there's social emotional supports that are available to our families during these school closures. And for families that department CCS, they could reach out to them specifically as needed. This was before we got our virtual offices up and running.
So within special education, again, with the goal of clear and consistent communication, we created a series of orientation videos. So we have a teacher video, classified staff, students and families, and then also a video for our community advisory committee. So we created these orientation videos, and they are also on our website, and they have been pushed out through social media and also through YouTube. And we also push them out through our student information system. I sent them out in email to all families. any way we could think of to make sure that people had, families especially, had access to this information. And then teachers were very involved as well. So the other key thing about, before you head off, Angela, the other key thing about that is we did involve our community advisory committee. So once we had our plan and we had our communication, we had a draft plan and our communication system set up, we met with our community advisory committee and we asked them to approve our special education distance learning plan. We have 17 preschool programs in our district. 5 of them are preschool classrooms for students with moderate to severe disabilities. And at the very beginning, preschool was oh my gosh, what are we going to do in distance learning with preschool? So our teachers started collaborating and working together, both general education and special education staff started collaborating, and we came up with a YouTube channel for these students where we're providing circle time and enrichment activities, developmentally appropriate, scaffolded, differentiated academic activities, social activities. We have our speech language pathologist on there doing language activities. Our OT and our PTs are doing motor activities with parents, parents on the other end, but we are really trying to engage our preschoolers in a way that we felt they could access the information the best. And parents are also involved in office hours. Now
I know we need to move forward. I'm sorry. I know that we have a hard stop in 1 minute. So I just wanted to highlight that we have some supports for English learners and some resources online that you have available for you to look at that are publicly accessible. And then some ideas for how we engage with our ELD students, providing those scaffolded supports even through distance learning. So those are all available online, including some tutoring hours in addition to their instruction with their teacher. And then lastly, obviously, we mentioned before, being flexible in our approach is something as we continue to move forward. This is our contact information. If you want to follow up and have questions, we apologize that we went a little bit over, but thank you for your time today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you both for sharing. We really appreciate this in-depth look. And again, this information will be archived on Facebook as well as made available later. We want to just let you know that the CDE is also here to support. We hope that you found these sessions helpful and informative. You may also visit the CDE's COVID page for guidance in a variety of areas. If you have questions about today's presentation, again, feel free to either put it in the Q&A or to reach out to the covid19@cde.ca.gov email address. CDE will continue offering a variety of webinars regarding distance learning on a variety of topics weekly, and we also have weekly communications. So if you haven't yet, please do sign up for our email updates through our COVID-19 listserv. Again, I want to thank all of our presenters today, Dr. Aguilar, Dr. Mkhitaryan, Ms. Swanson, and Ms. Herrera, for joining us. Thank you all, and be well.